I'm David Creelman, CEO of Creelman Research, and today we're going to talk about how we can get more value from our HR function. Why do we want to talk about changing the role of HR in any case? And the reason is that fundamentally we want to get more business impact out of the function. And I think both HR professionals and other C-suite leaders recognize that the levers of talent and culture, organization design, that's where we're going to get competitive advantage. And the function that has the greatest expertise in that is what we've been calling the HR function. And so we want to make sure we maximize the effectiveness of that part of the organization. It's funny, one of the projects I did with John Boudreau and Peter Navin was a study on non-conventional HR leaders, people who come into HR later in their career. And one woman we talked, from a mergers and acquisitions background, and she actually thought it was a joke when someone offered her a chief HR officer role. And initially she just wasn't interested because coming from the world of investments and M&A, it seemed like a step down to her. But once she was actually in that CHRO role, she realized this is the best job ever. This is where I can have the greatest impact on the organization. So certainly there is reason to believe that we can get a whole lot of value out of this function if we give it the mandate, if we give it the scope, and if we sort of transform it from its roots. You may think, well, what's changed in HR? And as I say, I think the two main things are, one is technology is transforming the function. I also talk about in this book that I did with Boudreau and Ravin, am I doing this right? Ravin Jethuthasan on Lead to Work, and we talked about the impact of the gig economy and how work is being broken into tasks. The other side of it, as I say, is this idea that we have an opportunity to add value. Now, how do you do that? And it starts by redefining the vision of the HR function. And again, a little, one of the things I've worked on most recently, my most recent book with Peter Navin is called The CMO of People. The important thing about that is that it's a new vision of how we position the role of HR. In this case, we're saying, here's one model where we see the role of HR being very much analogous to the role of CMO. And so we frame it as the CMO of people. Another really great source for reframing what HR is all about is Dr. Dave Ulrich and his book, HR from the Outside In. Now, the second thing is something that I finally got to do that I'd wanted to do for a long time, and it derives out of my work in analytics, but it has wide relevance to HR transformation. So here's how it starts. It starts that as part of moving HR forward, HR wants to do more on analytics. And I've always said it can't just be a specialized analytics function. We need the whole HR department, all those professionals to be analytics savvy. It doesn't mean they're statisticians, it just means they understand data, they know how to use data. And I'd been doing workshops on this, but I said, well, a workshop only takes us so far. What I really want to do is have action learning teams. And this is the technique that I'm recommending for you in your organization if you want to elevate the effectiveness of the HR function. So across a number of companies, we set up 10 different small action learning teams, 3, 4, or 5 people. Okay, and we went through a 5-step process. And basically it's just 5 one-hour meetings. And in the first meeting, we get the team to pick a business issue. That's how an action learning team needs to start. You need to start with an issue. In the second meeting, you narrow that issue to something much more specific. And you try to get as specific as you possibly can to the point where you maybe have a hypothesis. In the third meeting, you say, okay, well, given that we have this hypothesis that's relevant to this business issue, what data is going to help inform our decision on this? In the fourth meeting, you look at the data you gathered and you say, what does this tell us? And in the fifth meeting, you figure out how are we going to present this in a way that drives action. I have 2 tips for running an action learning team. First of all, make sure you start with a real business issue. Don't say, well, this is something small or this is something that has data, so we think it'd be a good topic to move forward on. No, start with what's most important. And that makes all the difference in the world. The other tip is that be ready for dealing with all the ambiguity. Typical HR functions work on fairly well-defined processes, and you go through step 1, step 2, step 3. But when you're going from a business issue to narrowing down, to coming up with a hypothesis, to deciding what data is relevant, to interpreting that data, there is a lot of ambiguity. And dealing with that ambiguity is, in fact, a leadership competence. If you think about the change going on in the world today, lots of ambiguity that people have to deal with. So be ready for the fact that they'll hit this stage of struggling with this ambiguity, but in fact, that's exactly what you want, because that's the leadership competency you want them to build. So to all the chief officers out there, thank you for listening to this. I think there's a real opportunity to continually elevate and transform the HR function so it has a greater business impact. And I think starting with this new vision, whether it be Ulrich model or the CMO of people model, and then helping implement it, helping bring it to life through real action learning projects, that's a nice, manageable way, scalable way to do this kind of transformation. Thank you very much.